if you'd like to join the conversation. 6 uniformed officers from Stawell spoke to the group, the white supremacist group in the Grampians, but no charges were laid, and the observation was made that it didn't appear that any crime had been committed. Dr. Dvir Abramovich is the chairman of the Anti-Defamation Commission, which is a civil rights organisation. Dr. Dvir Abramovich, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nicole. Please call me Dvir.
Dvir, thank you. The police suggested that no crime had been committed. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I've been arguing repeatedly for years that we need a change in laws. And I think what we saw over the last days signals a new willingness by white supremacists and neo-Nazi groups to put themselves front and center on the Australian public stage. And what we've seen over the last few years is an unprecedented outreach effort by these far-right groups. I mean, they're using technology to spread and weaponize hatred. But what they're also doing is they're taking their hateful ideology, which we see on social media, on message boards, on video sharing sites, into the real world. And they're targeting young people, especially white teenagers, on these platforms, but also by using this real-life activity because they are on a recruiting drive. And the most important thing we have to do is we have to take them at their word. We have to understand the kind of threat that they pose.
There are those who say that, oh, look, this is just a group of loudmouths. They don't, there were no crimes committed. Nobody got hurt. They're just letting off a bit of steam.
Well, the worst thing that we could do is to downplay, diminish, or to dismiss how dangerous these groups are. And I'll just remind you that a lone individual encountering, absorbing white supremacist propaganda can become convinced that it's a cause worth fighting for. I'll just mention very quickly Dylan Roof, frequented racist and anti-Semitic sites before he walked into an African-American church in South Carolina and gunned down 9 parishioners. You will probably remember, you may be young, but 26 years ago we had Timothy McVeigh, who used a truck bomb to destroy the federal building in Oklahoma City, murdering 168 people. And he took cues from white supremacist literature. And of course, we also know that Brenton Tarrant in New Zealand was radicalized online. So these are dangerous people. And the one thing that we have to understand about white supremacist ideology, like the kind that the NSN and others are promoting, it's an exterminist policy. It is about an Australia without Jews, without Muslims, without members of the LGBTI community, anybody who doesn't fit into the warped worldview. So we really have to have a whole society engage and lock shoulders with others in dealing with this serious problem.
We seem to be sort of wallowing in this habitual complacency. It happened when the coronavirus pandemic hit, and it took 770 cases a day for us to realise that infection control is serious. We seem to be in the same sort of mindset with white supremacists. They've never made any serious or provided any serious threat to the Australian way of life. And therefore, when a group of them loudly rattles through the Grampians, you get this pushback, which is, don't worry about it.
Well, as I've said in the media today, we do not need to wait for a Christchurch massacre to happen here before we take them seriously. Yeah. Okay? Make no mistake. The dangerous rhetoric that these Hitler worshippers, these are final solutionists. People need to remember that before he became a final solutionist and murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others, Hitler was an anti-Semite. And the rhetoric that they're spewing can cross the line into real-world lethal attacks, especially because these groups and the individuals within these groups glorify and are inspired by heroes, and I say this in quotation marks, or martyrs, who have carried out massacres like Robert Bowes in Pittsburgh and like Brenton Tarrant. So we do not need to wait for an atrocity to actually take on these neo-Nazis. I think it's very, very important. I just want to say one more thing. There's a sense from what we are seeing, the work that we are doing online, but also following and tracking these groups. There's a belief which we are seeing of what we call accelerationism. There is a sense that they have to save their race. That they believe that the white race here in Australia is being threatened with genocide or extinction. and they feel that they have to now justify and rationalize violence in the name of preserving their race. So I'm very concerned because they're agitating for a racial war. They're a clear and present danger. And we know one thing, that there's a clear linkage between incitement and violence, deadly violence. So, you only need a lone wolf shooter to actually cause, the murder of 10, 20, 30 people. This is quite serious, Nicole.
Victoria has 2 criminal offences for serious racial or religious vilification, but the threshold in actually trying to trigger those crimes is quite high. A Victorian government inquiry into the adequacy of racial vilification laws is set to hand down a report in March. What sort of legislative change do you think is needed to address this?
Well, I was one of the people who spearheaded, in a sense, triggered this, because I've been arguing for years that we need to look at anti-vilification laws. This was more to do with incidents about people flying the Nazi flag. We've had a Nazi swastika epidemic in Melbourne, so I think I commend the government for coming forth and actually implementing this committee. Hopefully they will legislate, and hopefully the recommendations will be ones that we're happy with. But I think this has to go further. We are looking at racially based extremism, and we have to candidly characterize and advocate that these groups be added to the terrorist list. I mean, this is a measure which is ready for immediate action, and I think what it will do, as they've done in Canada, it will bring the full weight of our law enforcement's resources to combat this ticking time bomb that is waiting to go off. They're not interested in debate or dialogue. These white supremacists want an Australia, which is an Aryan Australia. I mean, we have to understand this now. They won't achieve this, but they may engage in deadly violence, and nobody wants to see this. As I said, they're not going to go away by themselves. They are a danger to our nation, and they jeopardize our democracy and way of life. It's not an exaggeration. There really is a clear and present danger. I've been warning about this for years, and I think this is a debate that we need to have in the public square. I really think that we need to have a cabinet-level working group to develop a whole-of-government approach that sort of tears this terror threat at its root.
So these blokes who rambled around the Grampians at the weekend, putting up stickers, telling people that they hate Jews and blacks and that they should go home and have white children, and at one stage burned a cross, they should be listed as domestic terrorists. Oh yes. They perceive the Jewish people as their ultimate enemies. And, they frequent fringe social network sites that serve as echo chambers for the most violent forms of anti-Semitism and racism. They're actively recruiting grounds for potential terrorists, yes. And, again, if you understand the best-known white supremacist motto, which is also called the 14 word, which says we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children, you understand that their worldview is that unless immediate action is taken, the white race is doomed to extinction. And it's not a surprise that we had what happened in Christchurch. What happened in Christchurch can happen here. I'm fighting to prevent it. We shouldn't respond. You mentioned correctly about the coronavirus. We shouldn't have to wait for an atrocity, for a shooting rampage in Melbourne before we act. We saw Philip Galea, who was convicted, I think a month or two ago, for a plot to bomb a mosque. It can happen. And I think designating these groups as terrorist organizations would have a very strong impact. What is it about our society that grows young men who feel so alienated that they have this surge of hatred?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts to it. I think the greatest gift that the white supremacists got, and I think if Hitler was alive today he would be smiling, was the World Wide Web, which was supposed to be a superhighway for sharing information and knowledge. But it's also become, in a sense, a cesspool. It's as if, the lid has been taken off the sewer and all this poison is seeping out. So now every bigot, every racist, every white supremacist has a megaphone to spread their toxic agenda instantaneously, inexpensively, and anonymously. And they're reaching out. And there are young people who are looking for a scapegoat. We saw it through COVID-19 period. I can tell you that there were hundreds of groups on Telegram, for instance, that were formed in the midst of the coronavirus, which were promoting and propagating anti-Semitic conspiracies, saying that the Jews are responsible for the corona, that it was migrants who were responsible for the spread of the corona. Yeah. And you have young, impressionable people imbibing and absorbing this kind of poison. So we need to fight on all fronts. I mean, we've got the technology landscape and frontier that we need to deal with, Facebook and other technology providers. But I think the government needs to step in now and to say this is a war that we have to win. And I think the first step is to designate those white supremacist groups and neo-Nazis, as they've done in Canada and in other countries, as a terrorist organization.
Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Dr. Dvir Abramovich, Chairman of the Anti-Defamation Commission.